Good afternoon, KIPI listeners. This is Missouri Breaks doing our weekly show where we focus on a variety of public health topics. Sayandu, also known as Autumn, will bring the start of the phase Shakoi, which is the phase 7 of the Strong Heart Study, and we felt it would be good timing to learn more about the history of the Strong Heart Study and really its overall importance, not only to the communities who may be hearing this broadcast, but to Indian country across the United States. So today, Dr. Thomas Welty, Dr. Lyle and Marcia O'Leary have all worked on the Strong Heart Study for a number of years, have agreed to join us for this conversation. To open, we'll start with introductions, and Dr. Welty, if you would like to start.
Thank you very much for organizing this. It's a privilege to participate in this and think about the way that Strong Heart began. So I'll just briefly review my history working with Indian people, which began in 1970 when my wife and I were assigned to Tuba City, Arizona to provide healthcare to Navajo and Hopi people. And we were both general physicians and became family physicians through the American Academy of Family Physicians during our 12-year stay in Tuba City. And one thing that was striking to us when we were there was the fact that very few Navajo or Hopi people had heart attacks. And we weren't sure why that was, but it appeared to be possibly due to the fact that very few Southwestern Indians were smoking, and also the fact that they were not overweight, did not have a lot of diabetes, and were quite active physically, hauling water, chopping wood, grazing sheep, and so on. So then we worked for 3 years at the Centers for Disease Control and in the area of learning epidemiology. And we were both then assigned to Rapid City, South Dakota to work with the Aberdeen Area Indian Health Service. And it was quickly apparent that the number of Northern Plains Indians who were getting heart attacks and was a lot more than we saw in the Southwest. And as an epidemiologist, I was concerned, why are so many Northern Plains Indians getting heart attacks when we didn't see that in the Southwest? And I became aware of an opportunity to apply to the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute to access funding to study cardiovascular disease in the Northern Plains. And we selected 3 tribes, the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, Oglala Sioux tribe, and the Spirit Lake Sioux tribe. And those 3 tribes were part of the original application that was submitted in 1988. I believe we were one of 12 applicants, and NIH selected the Northern Plains, Oklahoma, and Arizona. And that's how we ended up with, I think, 12 or 13 tribes participating originally in the Strong Heart Study. And in addition to thinking about heart disease, I also was concerned about cancer because it was clear that cervical cancer rates seemed to be higher in the Northern Plains Indians than nationally. And there were also some Indian families that developed a high rate of colon cancer. So we were able to also get funding from the National Cancer Institute, and we screened all the Strong Hearts participants. Males were screened for rectal and prostate cancer, and females for breast, cervical, and rectal cancer as well. And because we were able to do that comprehensive approach, there were a lot of benefits that were available to both the participants and the tribes. Specifically, when we did the heart aspect of the study, we did EKGs and blood testing for lipids and other factors that might increase the risk of cardiovascular disease. And we administered a health risk appraisal and provided education to the participants on how they could improve their health. And when we detected abnormalities such as a possible cardiovascular disease on the heart disease on the EKG, these participants were then referred for clinical evaluation. And when we found abnormal pap smears or blood in the stool or any other indication of cancer, those patients were also sent for follow-up. So I think one of the reasons that the Strong Heart study is still continuing is because we made an effort from the beginning to maximize the benefits for both the participants and the tribes that were participating. And we, as much as possible, hired local people to do the work, such as Marcia Marcia O'Leary, the head of Missouri Breaks, began working as a medical student early on. And we had many local medical students or nursing students who actually did a lot of the work in doing the exams and following up when abnormalities were detected. So I thought that might provide some input on how the study began. And initially, the Aberdeen Area Indian Health Service was the grant recipient. And then this transitioned to Missouri Breaks, I think, in the third phase of Strong Heart study. And with that brief introduction, hopefully others can then add to that and cover anything that I may have missed on why the study began and how it has come to continue now for over 30 years. Thanks a lot for organizing this, Jill.
Yes, Dr. Welty, thank you. I'm actually getting to meet Dr. Welty, who was originally there when Strong Heart started. I was raised in Eagle Butte, so I've always known about the Strong Heart study. It's something that like common here because so many of our family members, I don't think I really knew what was going on, but you know, all the different buildings, oh yeah, that's where they do the Strong Heart study, or you know, down there, that's where they do the Strong Heart study. So thank you for introducing yourself to our listeners and really giving that foundational component, how this was very informed by your care, by direct patient care when you were a physician, how this research idea came to be. Dr. Best, if you want to introduce yourself and, you know, if you want to follow Dr. Welty's format of when you stepped into Strong Heart, that's fine, or we can roll it however you want to roll it, and then we'll let Marcia do an introduction too.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Jill. And thanks again for putting this on. I think it's really important for people to know the history of the various research efforts that have gone on in Indian country. My story is actually fairly similar to Dr. Welty's, and we've known each other for many, many years. I grew up in North Dakota in Wahpeton and went through medical school, actually went out to New York City for my for my medical school training, but came back to Minneapolis for my residency, also in family practice like Dr. Welty. And then I joined the Indian Health Service. Actually, I spent a month in Rosebud in 1976, but I started full-time in 1977 at Belcourt and the Turtle Mountain Reservation. And I had a very, very fulfilling, good career there overall. Spent a little over 20 years there and with the Indian Health Service, and another 8 or 10 years in a private clinic part-time. I also began teaching at the tribal college, and I'd been interested in genetics from even the time I went to medical school, and did some research while I was working for the Indian Health Service in certain genetic conditions. And around the time, let's see, it would be about 1994, there was a fatal plane crash. A number of physicians in the Great Plains area were killed in that, including the director of the maternal child health program. And so I took his place after his death, and spent 4 years with Dr. Welty as my supervisor, and became more and more involved with Strong Heart at that time. The other thing I was going to mention is going back even a little bit earlier than Dr. Welty's experience, I came to know a fellow by the name of Dr. Baines, who was an Alaskan native up in Alaska and worked along the Aleutian Islands. And he had been tapped to be a consultant for an NIH advisory committee. And during that time, he made some suggestions that perhaps some of the studies, such as the Framingham studies, a very well-known study in non-Indian communities, would be beneficial to repeat in Indian country. And the NIH took that to heart. And as I understand it, that was really the initial impetus within the NIH itself to think of granting this study. So. As Dr. Welty said, I guess my clinical experience at Belcourt from 1977 on, we saw lots of people with heart attacks. And it was puzzling to me to even listen to doctors from down in the Southwest to say, we're not really sure Indian people get heart attacks, because we had plenty of Indian people that were patients of ours who were getting heart attacks and strokes and so on. So that did not seem so surprising to me. And it was really gratifying to know that there was more scientific work going into understanding better the risk factors in Indian country and how they might compare with risk factors for non-Indian people. So I think I've said enough for now, and we'll continue on.
Well, for the introduction, Dr. Beston, we will move into Marcia, if you want to give an introduction and how you came to fit into the Strong Heart study.
Well, it was surely by the good graces of Dr. Welty that I came in to fit into the Strong Heart study. I started as a student intern, a nursing intern, because Strong Heart was always looking for interns to build capacity. And that's a practice that we've continued and thought that was critically important. And many of the providers and many of the long-term people at the at Eagle Butte IHS started actually as interns in the Strong Heart study. So I worked with Strong Heart for a summer or two, and then I finished my nursing degree, and I went on and I worked as a practical nurse, or a floor nurse, hospital nurse. And then a few years later, they were looking for somebody to be a field nurse here in Cheyenne River. So I met with the nurse practitioner who was the coordinator for many years. Her name was Beverly Blake Price. And she asked me if I would take on that job. And so I did. And then years later, I guess probably in phase 3, probably in about 99, 98, there was a legislation change where Indian Health Service was no longer in a position where it could do medical research. So they were transitioning more to clinical care and away from doing medical research for the communities. So at that time, Dr. Welty very graciously gave us a chance. And we said, well, why don't you let us be the grantee for this project, and we'll see what we can do. And so he did. He had faith in us, and he gave us a chance. And the rest has just been an amazing trip that has just expanded, and we've learned and we've grown, and we've had the opportunity to build tremendous capacity. There's been so many things that we've learned from the Strong Heart study. You know, there's been funding opportunities for our tribal nations, including like the special diabetes funds for almost all tribes are eligible to enroll in that. And we have that here on Cheyenne River. We have it in Spirit Lake. We have it at OST and many other places. You know, there's been numerous best practices that have come out of it, the Strong Heart study, including things such as understanding the role that heavy metals play in heart disease and cancer, the role of diabetes. Strong Heart led the nation in understanding the role that diabetes has in heart disease. And of course, legislation, you know, so we've seen lots of things change in terms of like smoking and allowing people to smoke in public, and, you know, where other folks are affected by it. And I have to believe that a lot of the work that was done by our group helped to inform some of that legislation. We certainly couldn't take credit for it all, but it certainly was a critical part of legislation to protect our youth, our elders, our the most vulnerable amongst us. So I've been with the Strong Heart for a long time, and it's been a privilege, and I've always just been humbled by the participants that I've worked with. So.
Well, I've been excited for this particular broadcast because you're looking at a built capacity. So Dr. Welty and Dr. Best and Marcia, the building capacity theme that you began with, I actually have been doing Strong Heart Study 7, Phase 7 training to get ready to help launch that here on Cheyenne River. And I thought, you know, for as much as I know about Strong Heart Study, I really don't know. And that was kind of the idea of the radio show. So I was told Marcia that's what I wanted to do, and she told me who to call to make it happen. And I know that her recommendations are good because I always do a radio agenda that's pretty flexible. And you've already hit on almost every question just with your introductions, which is good, but we can still elaborate a little bit more on those. So you really, the three of you combined, set a good stage about where this began, why this began, some of the outcomes. But when it was originally thought of, and you took that first application to NIH and the powers that be, was it designed to be a longitudinal study to this extent? Did you really think this was going to be 30 years worth of research, Dr. Welty?
Absolutely not. I mean, I knew about the Framingham study that Lyle mentioned. That's the foremost longitudinal study of cardiovascular disease. Framingham is a community in Massachusetts, and I don't know, it sounds like it's been going on for 50 years, and Strong Heart was sort of billed as the Indian Framingham study, but I didn't have any idea it would go on for 30 years. And it's just a wonderful thing that there's still people there. And I think the reason it's still going on is several factors. One is the support of the local Indian community. And Lyle mentioned Dr. Baines, who I communicated with when we applied as well. And there was another person in Rapid City, Rosamond Goins, was also on that same board, Lyle, and she and David Baines were very supportive of our application, and I suspect that's why it got funded. And the second thing is the participants. I did forget to mention a critical person, Dr. Arvo Upik, who was killed in that plane crash. And he would go on a monthly trip to 4 of the facilities in the Aberdeen area, and make the circuit 3 times. So he visited 12 of the facilities in the Aberdeen area to provide cardiac care to patients, and all of the patients we identified with heart problems he would see at Eagle Butte, Pine Ridge, or Spirit Lake. In fact, the plane crash occurred after taking off from Spirit Lake and going toward Belcourt, and occurred in Minot. So he would then identify patients who needed some sort of cardiac intervention and would refer them to Fitzsimmons Army Hospital in Denver. And he would then provide cardiac surgery and the latest approach to cardiac care for the patients that were identified through the Strong Heart Study. And above and beyond that, he read all the EKGs for all of the Strong Heart participants in all 3 regions for the first phase of this study. So his loss was tragic. And fortunately, we were able to continue with Dr. Devereaux doing a lot of the cardiac follow-up. And as time progressed, I think there were more resources available locally for the patients that needed care. So I wanted to mention that as a factor in why the study kept going on and on, was the support that we had and the focus on providing care to these the patients who needed it. Above and beyond that, there were the need to write papers and so on. And I think we had a cadre of people writing papers. And we also had administrative support, and through Missouri Breaks, Marcia, you've been able to hire people who know how to write grants and so on. And none of us really knew any of this, but we sort of learned on the job. So having the applications submitted in a timely manner with all of the appropriate scientific information was key to getting ongoing financial support from NIH. So that was a long answer. I hope it was okay.
No, it's great. And I just, a little overwhelming, but I think that's this recorded record, not only for our listeners to join in today, but for the history of this study, I think is really great to have on record, just for everything that has been built across, really across the country. Because as you spoke to, that even though the research may have not been done across the entirety of Indian country, it has really informed the policies of tribal nations and legislative work out in the DC area. So that is amazing. KIPI listeners, if you're just joining us, we are joined today with by Dr. Welty, Dr. Best, and Marcia O'Leary, who have all gave a significant portion of their career to the Strong Heart Study, just like a lot of our relatives have given a significant portion of their volunteering time to the Strong Heart Study. I don't think there's anyone on Cheyenne River who doesn't have know someone who's been part of Strong Heart. And I think the same question to you, Dr. Best, or anything you want to elaborate on. Did you really think this would ever happen, that we would be entering phase 7 of Strong Heart Study? And phase 7 is unique because we're launching all these ancillaries. So, anything you want to elaborate on?
Yeah, thank you. I'll go back a little further and I'll actually make a confession on this recording here, because I remember being being just kind of overwhelmed in the clinic at Belcourt. And I remember someone coming by and they kind of briefly described this project and would we be interested at Turtle Mountain to take part? And it was going to study heart disease. And it sounded to me very much like the Framingham study. And I was up to my nose in alligators anyway. And I didn't really see a need for this, because I thought, well, this has already been done. Why do we need to repeat this in Indian country? But I come to realize over time that it is very important, because none of us like to change the way we live. If we like eating this, we want to keep on eating that. If we like not doing much or watching TV, we want to keep on doing that. Same for smoking and some of these other things. So when we see our doctor and he tells us we should make a change, we're always automatically thinking up excuses about why we don't really need to make this change. And one of the excuses I would hear frequently in clinic is, well, yes, doctor, we know that smoking's not good for you, but it's different for Indian people. And it's important to us, and et cetera. And yes, we know we shouldn't have a blood sugar of 250, but Indian people automatically have high blood sugars. You don't need to worry about that. Well, the Strong Heart study, I think one of the very best things they did was to show beyond any doubt whatsoever that Indian people are just as susceptible to problems from smoking and high blood sugar as anybody else. And you need to take it seriously, and we can cross those excuses off the list. And now we can get to work and actually making changes. And I think that's one of the major contributions from Strong Heart.
Thank you for that. And so for Marcia, I'll pose either you could do or you can do both. Did you really think it would last this long? You would be here. And then I kind of like Dr. Best giving one of his favorite outcomes, that this was, what he really holds on to, that it helped him inform his work otherwhere. So, any comments you have on those two topics?
Well, I think that, I think I'm as surprised as anybody about probably not. I think if I talked to any of the participants, they wouldn't be surprised at all, because so many of the participants knew that they were contributing something larger than themselves. They knew they didn't do this. They didn't come into the study for themselves. And so many of them, if I had a nickel for everyone that said this to me, it would be amazing. But so many of our participants came in and said, this probably isn't going to do anything for me, but it'll help my children and my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren. And they understood that way before we did. They understood the importance of their participation and what it was going to matter. So, that's been very humbling for me to have learned so much from the people that I've served, that I've had the privilege to serve here. There's been so many good things that have come out of Strong Heart. It's just not only building capacity and the hundreds of nurses and dozens of doctors and psychologists and medical providers that have been trained on the ground with Strong Heart. I know that both Tom Welty and Lyle Best have done an amazing amount of promotion to bring providers out to our communities and to build capacity in our communities amongst Native students. They have, as they live and breathe, they do this just as they, as a part of who they are, is to build capacity around them and to be very generous in helping to raise up a new generation. So there's been, so many things on so many different levels that have helped people. The individual results, we've sent out thousands of results. And whether people chose to act on them or not was up to them, but at least they had the information. And Bev Price used to always say, people need to hear things more than once. They need to hear things at least 8 times before they start to say, oh, this is about me. And then there's people like me that needs to hear it more like 14 and 15 times until I say, oh, wait a minute, this is about me. So, every time that we can give people back personalized information about their health, about their, their needs, their conditions, it's good, because we're all on a learning continuum. We're all on a learning curve, right? So the people that have come through, it's amazing, because today we're starting to launch phase 7, and people come in and they're so proud of their participation. And, it's been an incredible journey, because a lot of these large cohorts across the nation, and by the way, Strong Heart has been identified by the National Institute of Health as one of the 6 most important cohorts in the nation. So it's risen to an incredibly valuable resource for health, public health in our health across the nation. But so many of the folks that have come in are just still incredibly proud their participation. And I was just at Pine Ridge here a couple weeks ago, and there was a gal that came in for an ancillary study that we were working on. And she was like, oh, I'm so glad that straight phase 7 is starting. My husband and I are so excited. we want to be the first in the door. So, I mean, and she's been with us since the very beginning. So, I mean, it's just the level of commitment and knowledge that our participants bring to these academics is just amazing. So it's been the combination. It hasn't just been, you know, an either or. It's been a combination of people that have made this study successful. And National Institute of Health has recognized the value that has been brought to public health across the nation because of the contributions of the Dr. Weltys and the Tom and Lyle Bests and our participants and the many, many people that have participated and made this happen. So it's been and it continues to be, and they're starting to say, now what would you do for phase 8? So they're already asking. So it's amazing.
Yeah. And so the one thing I've learned about radio is that good conversations go fast. And so with that, I think Marcia gave some excellent parting words there, but I want to offer any parting words from Dr. Best or Dr. Welty, because we are nearing in on our time for the radio show and you guys gave us so much information. But if there's anything else that you want to say to our listeners before we part ways for the day. Dr. Best, would you like to start?
Yeah, one thing that I think is really important to emphasize, and I know Marcia's made this comment many times, and I think most people understand that who are participants, but I think a lot of people view research as kind of a one-time thing. You know, we might even take a year or two to do it, and then we write a report and we're done. That's the end of it. But you really don't learn nearly as much that way as you do, and Marcia mentioned a learning curve, and that's really what we've been on over the last 30 years or so with Strongheart. You need to begin at one point and then to follow people over time to see what develops. And that's the most accurate and the most beneficial way to do research. It's called longitudinal research, and that is the gold standard for this. Generally speaking, we can't put people in an experimental situation where we've got these people, we force them to smoke for 10 years, and we have these people, we force them not to smoke for 10 years, and then we wait 20 years to see what happens. We can't do that. But the next best thing is to do a longitudinal study where we find out what people are doing now, and we see what results over the next 20 years. And so for that to work, you not only need to follow these individuals, but you need to have medical samples, blood samples, urine samples, and so on that you can use later on. We often develop new tests and so on. So maintaining the integrity of those samples and maintaining that control over those samples is extremely important for the real important research that's done.
And the importance of our participants willing to consent to all of that longitudinal keeping of all of those things and use of them as technology grows is huge too. Dr. Welty, do you have any parting words for our listeners today?
Well, just to share with you how gratified I am to see you leading this effort, because health education is the key for much of the preventing much of the morbidity and mortality, not only in Indian country, but throughout the nation and the world. So just keep up the good work. And it's great to see young people like you taking over this to ensure that the knowledge is shared with people who need to know, and that you can use your own persuasion to encourage them to adopt healthier lifestyles. And when they have problems, you know, making sure that there's a way for them to follow up and continue contacting them if, in fact, initially they refuse what would appear to be appropriate care. Thank you.
And thank you for those kind words, and just so many Wopila to not only the three of you, but I don't think anybody could list anymore. Everybody that's had a hand in really making Strong Heart work, from the participants to the PIs, to the research assistants, to the nurses, you know, to everybody, the people on staff that drive out and pick up participants and bring them. I just don't think that there's a running list anywhere. So if you're listening and you've ever helped with Strong Heart, thank you. And with that, we are definitely at time. So I will go ahead and turn it back over to the radio station.